Hello, Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Kamp, President and CEO of the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce, here for our January 15th, 2021 legislative update, the first of the 2021 legislative session and the first of the start of the new General Assembly, which will be this year and next year, as each are 2 years between election cycles. I want to really just start this series, really this legislative update series that we'll be doing every Friday throughout the legislative session, by first just kind of highlighting some of the key points that we saw the governor talk about and how those align with our priorities. And then I'll also touch on some additional information that's going to be timely and applicable for you as members to make sure that you're getting the most accurate information and timely information possible as we continue to move through the legislative session. As I kind of jump right in, I want to start with just some of the key points that were brought up within the governor's condition of the state address, but also how they align with our priorities and how they rank within our priorities. So the first thing I want to talk about is the overall idea of tax reform. So we're looking at corporate income tax reform, and then also personal on some level, but corporate income tax reform would be the predominant piece that would be brought in. And the good news for us is anything in the Senate in that regard would go through Senator Dan Dawson, a local here of Council Bluffs, Iowa, who's chairing the Senate Ways and Means Committee. So along those lines, as we look at tax reform, it's going to be really important to us as a chamber and as an economic development and community development organization, because anytime you look at tax reform, you're going to have to look at tax credits, which are extremely important to the work we and Paula and others do as we try to grow our community and attract and retain new workers and new employers. So that's a really important thing as to what the tax credit structure looks like. And also it's important to note, with us being a border community, Nebraska just redid their incentive structure last legislative session. So we need to make sure that anything we do is aligning with them and allowing us to be very competitive with them, so we can make sure that we can compete as best as possible with the projects that we do with our neighbors across the river. Another thing to look at as well, and Senator Dawson will talk about this if you ask him, is the fact that it's not just the tax credits, it's the deductions, it's the exemptions, it's everything that goes in to the tax system that makes that rate what it is, especially for corporate income tax. So anytime we look at doing reform in the scale that they're talking about doing at this session, they're going to consider all of those things. So we needed to stand ready and able to be able to defend and provide information to say why things should or should not be changed with regards to some tax credits, some deductions, and some exemptions. And here at the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce, we are working on that with our partners, specifically Cheryl Garst and Paula Hazelwood, as well as the city and our other public partners as well, to get some of that good information for Senator Dawson and others who will be making these decisions on tax reform. As we look at some of the key tax credits that would be getting impacted, we're looking at the workforce housing tax credit, and I'll talk more about some proposed improvements to that later, but also the brownfield grayfield tax credit for redevelopment projects, the high quality jobs program and targeted jobs program, and 260 E&F job training programs that we use for new business and attraction and retention projects for economic development projects. But another thing to also take into account is, while this is on the property tax side, anytime we're looking at tax reform and discussion about economic development, community development tax credits, TIF may also come up as an issue. So we need to be ready to provide some good information and defend TIF as it's used in our locality, and how we're a good actor in using TIF to grow our community in a positive way without putting undue burdens on taxpayers here within the community. But we also need to look at not only using it for the developmental side, but we also need to look at in economic development projects, but we also need to look at how we can improve it for residential. There are some specifications and changes and differences that have to be done with TIF if you use it for residential versus economic development projects. But it's important that we look and have those conversations, because if we're going to grow the community housing wise, as we look at growing the greater Omaha Council Bluffs MSA by hundreds of thousands over the next decades, and if we want to be able to build houses and attract the people to live in our community, we need to be able to have every possible resource we can. And TIF is definitely one of those tools in the toolbox for residential if some improvements and changes are made that we could definitely find beneficial. A few other key items that I wanted to talk about that the governor addressed in her condition of the state address, but we're also big proponents of, and are high-level priorities for us for this legislative session is broadband. The governor proposed injecting $450 million over 3 years to broadband funding throughout the state. That's huge. We are fully supportive of that. We want to work with our partners in the area to make sure we can move something like that forward. We all know how important that is, and especially in relation to the pandemic, as people are learning, working, and getting healthcare remotely. So we need to make sure we can continue to provide those resources with regards to broadband. We'll advocate for that strongly. Another piece is childcare. Childcare is something, whether it's public, private, nonprofit partners we talk to, everyone kind of acknowledges the fact that is not only an issue in general, it's a big workforce issue. It's keeping people out of the workforce. It's making it not feasible or sustainable for some people to work to pay the bill that they might have to pay for childcare. So it's important to note the first 6 House bills that came out this year were related to childcare. So they're really drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is where we are right now in childcare, and recognizing where it is for a priority. We're going to continue to advocate for that because we think it's good for our workforce and our employers, but also our community at large. A couple things specifically within childcare I want to note is the governor proposed $25 million to provide childcare development block grants and $3 million for public-private partnerships for opening new childcare options facilities, things along those lines. That's going to be important because that's in addition to the Childcare Employer Innovation Fund that was made available last year, and we just sent an update out saying that those applications for employers who want to improve their offerings for childcare are now available as well. So when you add that to the toolkit of that employer, and when you add some of those proposals the governor just talked about, that additional $28 million for additional resources to that employer innovation fund specifically targeted for childcare, that's something that could have a real impact. And we're hoping with some of those House bills, there can be some unity between them and the Senate, and we'll see some things move forward on childcare because that's a really important issue within Council Bluffs, Southwest Iowa, and just the state as a whole. I mentioned specifically some tax credits that are very applicable to what we do and our partners do here in the community. The workforce housing tax credit is something that has become so popular, we haven't been able to apply for it in the last couple of years because the way they put it into place at first, it was a first come, first serve. They didn't have a merit system. They didn't have anything along those lines. So a queue and a backlog formed, especially within urban communities, because it's a refundable tax credit for development of qualified workforce housing projects. So we haven't been able to see it utilized as much in urban settings, whereas in rural, it was paid off last year and the year before. So they would have access to be able to use it. But the important piece that we're looking at from the governor's proposal, and we know there's support in the House and the Senate, we just have to determine what funding and what level they want to put that support at, is the governor proposed increasing the allotment for the workforce housing tax credits to $50 million and also making some other changes to it that would make it more accessible and more impactful for communities throughout the state, which is also important for us as we look at growing our housing stock and attracting additional workforce. I mentioned the brownfield, grayfield redevelopment tax credits. They're set to sunset this year. We don't think that they'll let them sunset. They're a viable option that are important tools in the toolbox for any community development and economic development organization in the state. But the governor did propose extending those 10 years while increasing the allotment from $10 million to $20 million. So we are supportive of that and want to continue to see that move forward. Another key piece in big policy issue that we've talked about for years, and it's become especially applicable, especially in the pandemic, when we've seen some of the impacts kind of having to close down, and then also just between educators, healthcare workers, everyone in general, just dealing with the difficulties that the pandemic has provided. Mental health is a big issue. We were happy to see in the governor's condition of the state and her budget, she put forward the next 2 years, $15 million. So a total investment of $30 million over the next 2 years and 15 million allotments over each year to mental health. That's important because that was a piece that she was pushing for and Invest in Iowa, which got scrapped heading into the session. So we needed to make sure that there was something to address that issue because we know it's so important to our communities. So we were happy to see that move forward. There are a few items I want to hit kind of quickly regarding education in our community school districts as well, and they're impactful to our schools, and we really need to kind of sit and wait and get some more details on what this would look like, but there's some positive and some negative implications of some of these proposals. The governor did propose requiring schools to offer parents an option of 100% in-person education. She wanted to make open enrollment available to all school districts, and creation of public charter schools and creation of education savings accounts for students to move to another school so the money kind of follows them as they would go to a different school. We'll continue to work with our partners in the community school districts at both Lewis Central and Council Bluffs Community School District to continue to get input on some of those impacts and what and how we can best be of assistance as a chamber and as a business advocacy organization. Another piece I wanted to touch on, because workforce is so important. We all know that. We're so happy that Alicia Fries and Iowa West Foundation, the city, the county, so many others have seen the importance and have invested in that underneath the chamber portfolio. And as we look at how we're going to roll out that workforce program, it's important to obviously have the resources made available, not only at the local level, but at the state level. So some of the things that were proposed by the governor is expanding workforce learning opportunities for all high school students. I don't think anyone can disagree with that, but also providing an additional $23 million in the last dollar scholarship. That's a $10 million increase. That's part of Future Ready Iowa. And what that does is it really provides gap funding for people to really be able to make sure that they can move forward and get the training they need to at our great community colleges, um, to really fill those high need skills gap positions throughout our communities. So that's something that's very, very important. Another topic that's been very much talked about lately, as well as placemaking and quality of life projects. Those are things that can be very impactful to communities for attraction and retention purposes, but we also believe they can have a tie into workforce and making people want to work and recreate and live in your community. So that's something we're going to be supportive of as Debbie Durham at Iowa Economic Development Authority, her and her staff kind of move forward some proposals in that regard. We want to make sure that we as chambers and economic development organizations are right there alongside helping promote that, because we believe that'll be a positive for our community. Another thing that we want to make sure that we're monitoring are the recommendations that came out of the Governor's Economic Recovery Advisory Board that was set up as a result of the pandemic, but then also the Empower Rural Iowa Task Force. Those are things we want to make sure we continue to advocate on, those recommendations that were put forward, and they have meaningful policy implications for things like broadband and different things like childcare are kind of embedded in some of those recommendations. So those are things we want to make sure we continue to monitor and push forward on as well. Another thing that I wanted to specifically note that the governor did speak about, because it has some implications to healthcare, which is obviously a very critical sector and employs a lot of individuals here in the community, is the governor did propose $1 million for programs to align rural physicians with specialists. And that's obviously important as we look at not only supporting telehealth with broadband, but telehealth in general to provide those services to those in need, but then also just filling the gaps with rural physicians and specialists to make sure that there's that quality of care throughout the area. A few things that I wanted to touch on that are kind of outside of the policy, conversation of what's happening at the Capitol are some things that we're going to be doing here at the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce to keep you guys up to date and make sure you're getting the resources you need when it comes to public policy throughout the session. First thing I wanted to note is every Friday we will be doing these videos and we'll be putting them out to make sure you're able to keep up on what's happening at the legislature. That's something we think is very, very important, and I want to be a resource as much as I can in that regard. If you have questions, reach out to us, let me know. I'll be happy to get a response back as soon as I can and get you an answer to anything you may need. Another thing that I wanted to touch on is we do have legislative lunch events coming up. While we won't be providing lunch because it's a virtual event, it'll be the fourth Friday of every month, January through April, and it'll be from 12 to 1 p.m. And we'll be inviting our local legislators, all 6 of them, to participate and provide updates on what's happening at the state legislature. Those will be moderated by myself, but participants can ask questions via the chat function. Another piece that I wanted to note is in lieu of a legislative reception this year due to COVID and the fact that they're kind of pushing to not have those as part of the protocols of the Iowa legislature set into place last week. We're also going to be doing a legislative overview on February 23rd from 12 to 1 p.m. That'll be sponsored by Google and some other great sponsors that we have within the chamber. But I think that's an important piece to note as well, because that'll be something where we'll be inviting the respected leaders of each caucus and each chamber to speak to us and provide some insights on where their caucus is on some priority issues and where they see things going throughout the legislative session. And that date, the 23rd, was specifically chosen due to the fact that's the week before the first funnel, which is when we really start to see some bills die or move forward and they really get winnowed down. So it's an important time to be talking to legislative leadership, and that's why we plan to do so that date. So in closing, I just want to thank you for watching these videos. I want to thank you for your investment in the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce. We know this has been kind of an uncertain and kind of a challenging year, but we want to make sure that you continue to know that we're going to be here for you in a litany of different ways, providing resources, information, and advocacy opportunities, and also just advocacy efforts in general, such as this. So please do reach out to us with any questions you have. I appreciate your support. I appreciate you watching this update. Take care of yourself out there in the inclement weather and have a very nice weekend. Thank you.